This is a Polar Star podcast.
Yo, welcome to A Better Tomorrow, a series of discussions on national issues through a local lens with me, your host, Tim Duffy. My guests this week are Micaela Tepler and Leah Douglas. They both perform comedy here in Portland, but I invited them on the show to discuss their occupation as educators. We talk about the positives and not so positives of teaching in Maine, the amount of effort that has gone into educating during the pandemic, and their cautious optimism for the next generation. This was filmed back in January, so we are wearing masks. Here it is, my discussion with Leah and Micaela. I met both of you through comedy, and throughout knowing you, I discovered that you're both teachers.
Yeah, I remember being so nervous when I started to do comedy because I was a teacher before I did comedy.
Yeah.
And it stinks because of the pandemic. I just really started doing recordings of myself. Like, I'm not going to name names. There are people who shadow box before they go on stage, but they do a recording every single time they're at an open mic. And I just wouldn't do it.
I wish you could record eye rolls.
I would kind of go up to people and be like, if you could just turn off the camera and cut me out because I don't want this on the internet.
Yeah.
Especially because I remember having students there was a student teacher or something, and she was a dancer, and she had some sort of audition tape that ended up on YouTube, and they were not kind to her about it, apparently. But I was more afraid of getting fired.
Before I even thought I was gonna do teaching, my comedy was always, I had videos. I don't have recent videos at all, but I had videos, but they were totally private because I was like, I got higher aspirations. I was like, someone's going to use this against me someday. And I say naughty things.
But now I have before the school year started, I wrote this comedy piece and it got published. And I was not very nice to admin in it, and I just didn't even care. I was like, what? They cannot fire me, and it's not about them. And if they think it's about them personally, we need to have a separate conversation, I think, with a union member or
if
something.
If they get hurt by someone writing a comedy article, they can't handle being a high school administrator with kids being like, fuck you, every other minute. And pointing out that your eyebrows don't match each other.
Is that something kids do?
Kids just read you whenever, certain students will definitely try intentionally to get under your skin.
What's more painful is the ones that are not trying to, and then they just say something really mean. This story I'm about to tell is not that case. This kid is intentionally mean. But I have been wearing mascara since I hit puberty. I've never not worn it. And for whatever reason, I was probably spiraling out. Who knows why? I did not wear mascara that day. And the kid just looked at me. He's like, you look like Arthur when he takes off his glasses.
Oh my God. That's hilarious. What I love to do is I love to show my students pictures of my friends and family and have them read them while they're not there.
That's fun in me.
Which is, it's a little mean.
Wait, so you show them pictures?
Yeah, I showed them
people
pictures
you know, and then
of my comedy friends, and I was like, "What do you think these people do for their lives?" Oh, and one kid was like,
"So they write the look-like jokes for you. If you're ever in a roast battle, you can just write them down."
What is this guy? What impressions?
And they're coming up with probably some great material.
My favorite is I'll have a picture of me and my family up, and they'll be like, "Why are your sisters hotter than you?"
I think they just like to read. They love it. Read as in be mean and
read people.
When I say give you a read, it's
honestly, I am so sick of visual learners.
I'm sick of it.
I'm so
Tim
sick.
does not get how fucking much of a mic drop that would be at an education conference if someone just got up on the stage and was like, you know what? I'm sick of
Go read a
learners.
book. But they're like all of my students have always been like so appearance focused, and I think there's a lot to that, especially
might
with the
be.
group of kids that I work with. But it's just so hard to be like, actually, we can watch CNN 10 and we don't have to comment on every single person's flaws.
Everything we say.
Every single
Anyways, Tim,
minute.
do you have questions to us, or do you just want us to bitch about our jobs?
I want a little bit of both.
Okay.
What grades do you teach?
I teach 9 through 12. It's kind of like a one-room schoolhouse for the high school. And I am certified in English, but I teach in an alternative ed program that does like cross-curricular stuff. So we do like units that aren't separate like classes. So the one I always go to describe it is we did a units on the Olympics, and we had a minute to win it game at the beginning of every class. But then we went into the history of different countries, and they had to write an essay on like why their city they picked should be the next Olympic city. But we also did math and like graphing with it. So it's like
It's all
all
everything
wibbly wobbly.
together. Nice.
Yeah, I do middle school science. Right now I'm teaching 8th, but I will loop back down to 7th next year.
Okay.
And do
That's
7th and 8th.
kids in their prime.
Oh yeah, and they're in their smell prime.
Yeah.
Nothing smellier than a 7th grader after they hit puberty on Thanksgiving break.
Yeah, because you're still on that like I don't have to shower every day.
Oh yeah, I have a joke about this actually, where it was like also they're just younger. Like 7th graders, some of them have already hit puberty, a lot of them haven't yet, and they're like it's edging up on them.
Yeah.
And when I started, last year was my first year, and I started, and I was like, oh, they said middle schoolers would smell really bad, but like, it doesn't smell that bad. It honestly doesn't. And then they went home for Thanksgiving break, and then they came back, and it just smelled like rotten genitals.
Did they all hit puberty over break?
So many of them hit puberty over break and they like did, and it was like quick enough that they didn't realize it yet.
Yeah.
And so it was just like the purest smell.
Well, and it gets colder.
Disgusting crotch hormones.
You're closing the windows, and they're sweating because it's like hot and cold and hot and cold.
Yeah. They sweat under their jackets.
If they wear jackets.
Yeah.
How do you think doing comedy do you think that's helped with teaching, or do you think teaching has helped with comedy?
I will say that like having a natural stage presence and being able to command attention makes my life a lot easier. Kids, I mean, especially middle schoolers, if you're entertaining them and you're like loud and in the front being like, hello, I'm here. Like you do, if you treat your lessons like a comedy act, or at least like the fact that you have to just same idea that you have to keep everyone engaged as long as possible.
Yeah.
It is definitely it does make things a lot easier.
I think one informs the other too.
True.
Like this isn't gonna sound good, but like before I started doing comedy, my bubble was a lot smaller. And then you go to open mics and you meet all sorts of different people.
Just the salt of the earth.
And so now when I encounter a student that I don't connect with, I'm like, oh, there are people out there who are horrible, and you've probably encountered them.
Yes.
And that might have informed why you are this way. But then there's also my kids say wild things constantly, and you can work that in. And I did theater before I did comedy and things like that. So like holding like people's attention is always a big part of
having a stage presence. Truly, like I can't imagine being able to teach if I didn't. I'm not the type of teacher that kids are like, Mom, I'm gonna love you just naturally because you're my mommy sort of teacher. Those teachers just like have it fucking made somehow.
Damn.
But being able to hold their attention is like huge for me.
Yeah.
The big thing that comedy has helped me with, like I intentionally, when I'm doing stand-up, there's a point where I'm like, I have to be okay with silence because silence will make this beat hit harder, or I need to just not care and not rush. And I've taken that like into my classroom because I have to be okay with silence when I ask a question because I need to give them time to think, or they need to know that they're not off the hook if like if nobody answers, that I'll just drop the subject and
The
move
ability
on.
to think on your toes as well, having
Yeah.
something else stocked up if there is just that uncomfortable silence. Yeah.
And like when I first started doing comedy, I would have my sets, and like I would interact with the audience, but I would never do like I would never just feed off the audience in the way that like other comedians do. Like I'm not doing like crowd work a lot.
Mhm.
But it's helpful in comedy to do crowd work has informed my teaching in that like I can't always anticipate somebody's answer, and I shouldn't, because I should want to know what my students are thinking and how they're thinking so that I can either lead them in the right place or, let them lead me in a different direction. So
Crowd
that's been
work
really helpful.
can make or break both a lesson
Yeah.
and a comedy act. Both my best and worst lessons and comedy acts had crowd work.
Just moments
involved.
in life. Like we'll be reading a short story and suddenly we're talking about how if I don't have children, I'm going to die alone. And then we're just talking about how children are made. And now we have a whole sex ed lesson we have to have because he has said some wild things that need to be corrected.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, of
Have you
course.
ever said any like fucked up things to kids? Like when they ask fucked up questions, I will tend to give them an honest response. Have you ever had like where you've just like sort of unintentionally but intentionally said something effed up? Maybe we shouldn't review this.
Well, I think frequently, like my classroom is such a different vibe because it's alternative ed. And so like I don't have a lot of pressure from parents because the parents are invited into our classrooms, and we do student-led conferences twice a year, but they're not hover parents for the most part. And so my students ask me wild things all the time. This isn't one of them, but online teaching has been crazy in the things that I have seen and the things that they have said. Like one student was like, I can't join the Kahoot, I'm in the shower. So he had his laptop, I assume, propped up on his toilet with the camera off, and he was just living his life. Like
just like answering.
Yeah, and he was clearly paying attention because he knew we were about to play a Kahoot, but he was just like, I can't hit the buttons because I can't ruin this laptop right now.
We should probably, for the at-home audience and perhaps Tim, who don't know what
Yes.
Kahoot is.
I do not know what that is.
It's like a quiz platform that's super interactive, and it is absolute crack. Like, I don't like to compare things to drugs, but Kahoot has somehow created an addicting back and forth that kids will live and die for.
Yeah, we play it every day, and the kids are like, can we do something else? But then every time we play the Kahoot, it's like game
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
But the craziest thing this year that I've had to say is somebody definitely like had a bong, and they were talking about how they glued it together, and I was like, please don't put fire into that and inhale fumes. Like, do not inhale wacky like glue or whatever, gorilla glue or whatever it is. You glue
Keep that hit pure.
like
Just weed.
And I didn't go so far, but I just like kept going, and they're like, no, this is how a bong works, and I didn't crack. I was not like,
oh, that's how.
Ma'am.
Oh, I had no idea. Wow, we didn't have those back in our day.
Shell out the $10, get a one-hitter, stop with this madness.
They're not expensive.
Wait, what?
Go to a gas station.
Oh, just I'm
Oh,
pro
well.
bong, not for high schoolers, but
Yeah.
I clearly I can't stop it. You know what I mean?
oh
Like
yeah, of course not. When I actually I taught summer school in your district, and the kids were just like talking about how they like to get messed up, and I was like, "Can you not? You're in summer school.
Yeah,
It's 2 hours. We are
This
already
is
just
why
like,
you're in summer
This is why you're
school.
in summer school. Let's keep this out of summer school for the hour and a half we are here."
With this year and how everything has been, like, is Kahoot, is that new to? That was around before.
No, that's been around.
It's been around.
Years.
But do you feel like you've been getting guidance on how to move through this, or do you feel like you've had to improvise?
As a young tech savvy person, bitch, I am the guidance.
Nice.
No, it's not nice.
I am also like one of the youngest people in my
Yeah.
district, which is insane because I've been working there for 7
That
years
is
Yeah.
and I'm one of the youngest people there. So everybody's asking me how to do things and like I I
I
have some
know.
coworker. It's just we're inundated is the thing. Like at the beginning of the year, I think the district wanted to CYA, cover their ass, make sure that we've offered you all these things, but not really like given us in depth, which in fairness to them would have been really hard to give in depth training
Mhm.
on in the 2 days that we had. Um set aside for that. But like some of my coworkers have just been so overwhelmed. There's like, here's a new platform, here's a new
Oh,
platform,
they
here's a new
can't handle it.
platform. And in my district, we're hybrid immediately, which means that luckily not for me because one of like I said, I have a co-teaching model and one of my co-teachers is remote. So they have been handling the online stuff, which
Oh,
has been really
that
made our life
is
easier.
wow.
Yeah. But all the rest of, not all of the rest, most of the rest of the mainstream teachers who, like I said, I'm the youngest of almost all of them, have to simultaneously teach and like in person and online. And
Mm.
like our school isn't super affluent, so it just like does not have the technology to like keep up with that. Like we don't even have the bandwidth
Oh
to
my
like
gosh. Yeah, no,
teach
that's
and
the
do that.
huge issue. Good thing none of the students show up when they're remote.
Yeah, that's a big issue too.
Like, what do you do in that case? Are you just like,
I
oh, they're
find
not
at the
here?
middle school level, at least in my district, which is less affluent than Leah's district, it's the only kids who are getting stuff done remotely regularly are gifted or have a full-time parent at home, which is rare in my district. Not the gifted part, but full-time parent at home, that's rare. It's a lot to ask of an 8th grader. I also just think there aren't enough resources available to those kids. There's only resources for like the lowest of the low in the district. We have like 10 spots at this one community center for kids who are struggling the most, but then it's like most kids are struggling with the online aspect. It's
Yeah, especially
yeah.
at middle school level. And that's such a hard age because, like, let's say 13, you're on that cusp of like, you're not a kid anymore, but still nobody
Yeah.
will listen to you or guide you or
Exactly.
help
And
you.
well, and your parent expects that if they leave for the day that you'll set an alarm, wake up yourself, but that is like not
I
possible.
mean, I would because I um feared in middle school.
Oh,
I
yeah. Oh my, yeah, I had the fear of God in me in middle school. I would have probably like skipped my first class and been like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I have an orthodontist appointment," and then make it up, and they would have been like, "I know you're lying, but I don't care because you did your work."
Well, and there's the thing like with our kids, we keep wondering because the district has provided like hotspots and things for internet to try to like say, oh, once again CYA to say, oh, you should be online because you have internet because we
Yeah.
gave it to you.
Yes, we have that too.
But like some we're not united as teachers as like some teachers say you're not going to be counted president if you don't have your video on,
Yes.
which is like really
Oh, it's invasive. It's
it's
terrible.
it's invasive. It promotes inequality because like if you're poor or like if your parents are doing something that is inappropriate,
Yeah.
then what are you going to do? Like you're just not going to show up for
Yeah.
class because you don't want to explain to yourself in front of the whole
Some of my
class why you don't
colleagues
have
are
your
really
video on.
insensitive to that, and they're just like, "I just need to see their faces," and it's like, no, I think you really just need to get comfortable
It's not about you.
with appreciating the fact that they are there, because oh, it's a tragedy. And actually, NPR, it was today or yesterday, posted a piece about how one of the biggest tragedies of the pandemic is just losing track of so many students. Just the flabbergasting amount of truancy. It's really, really alarming. And seeing that in my school, it's just like one of the saddest things I've witnessed.
What's strange is, and we have more students in my classroom. Like with hybrid, it's supposed to be split, and there should only be 8 students in a class, and that, for the most part, is what is happening in the mainstream. But with my class, we're in a building out back that is a little bit bigger, but also we are meeting such a big need because we're kind of a dropout prevention program, and people are recommended to us. It's complicated. I love the program I work with, but we have way more students than we really should safely in that space. We make it as safe as it can be, and we separate them. But our attendance hasn't been that bad, except there have been just like 1 or 2 students who just like disappear off the
Yeah.
face of the
Yep.
earth, and there's no
Exactly.
way to
And
reach
it's not the
them.
students who normally do that. And you can just tell there are these families that have, since April, maybe lost their job and are just have been going on by the skin of their teeth these 9 months, whatever it has been, and now are just losing it and just dropping off and either going to shelters or getting in toxic relationships for the sake of housing and things like
Safety,
and
shelter.
safety and stuff like that. And it's so heartbreaking to just lose these kids. And of course our guidance offices are so overwhelmed with how many kids we're losing. And it's
And
really tough.
of-
Wah, wah, comedy podcast.
I know. Of course, adults have to take care of themselves, but what is also bad with these students is that like so many of them need like social work services,
Mhm.
and like some of our social workers are remote, and like a lot of the time, like with these kids, like they're not like, hello, I would like to see a special person, and everybody knows I'm gonna leave class
Oh,
and talk to my
Jesus.
special person.
Oh,
Like you
God.
kind of have to wrangle them to
Yeah.
go, and after a while when they're comfortable, they're like, oh, this is great, and I actually needed this.
Well, but also
But
if
you
they're-
can't do that when they're
Yes,
remote.
exactly. Well, and if they're not going to school and we don't have contact with them, we can't get them their social services. It's so
So is it like you've seen? It's not just a lot of students are missing the online portion, but then show up. It's just they won't. They're just gone.
there's both. So there are kids who there are a lot there. I would love, maybe I should, this is what I should do my graduate research paper on, is just like the ratios of kids who are showing up and remote, doing all 4 days we have of the tip of the school week we have right now. So there are some kids who show up remote and show up in person. There are some kids, a greater portion of kids, who show up in person but don't show up remote, and they sort of like just make up everything in the last 2 weeks of the trimester. And then there's also like an alarming portion of kids who don't show up for either. Or what I'm seeing a lot is that they'll show up like 1 day a week. So we have kids either come Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday,
I was just
Friday.
gonna
They'll come
ask if
like
that's
one
what-
day, and they sort of just slip between the cracks because it's like, well, were they doing work at home? We're trying to figure out if they were actually absent or not when they just like realistically have missed an entire month of school. It's just a logistical nightmare right now.
I was just gonna ask if that is how your hybrid schedule is set up. I have found that so group A, which is Monday and Tuesday, their attendance is like bow bow bow. They are
Yes.
there, and there is some spottiness with online attendance for them,
Yes.
but they are doing the work at home. They're making it up. But my group 2 kids, it's interesting because I have a lot of kids with trauma as it is. And trauma, whether it's like just anxiety or PTSD or whatever trauma it is, really messes kids up. I found chronologically. They don't have a sense of time.
Yes.
Like our
or like
schedule,
memory that works in the way that they can just like understand consistency.
Yeah, our schedule in the school has not changed for the 7 years that I've worked there. I think maybe we had silent reading once and we took it out of the schedule, but other than that, the periods have been the same. And I have seniors this year, and not when they're not in school Monday and Tuesday, they're not online, and then they can't get a feeling of the week. And then,
yeah.
but then also they come to school and then they just feel like they can leave whenever because like they're almost adults, they're seniors in high school, and nobody's looking after them at home telling them to go to school during the
Yeah.
time that they're supposed to be. So we have kids just scheduling like hair appointments, just like leaving,
You know,
or
like,
just like not showing up at all. Like they
Miss
just cannot
Douglas,
get a
you
feeling.
always tell us about self-care. I'm sure someone's done that to you.
No, Darrell has a very strict schedule and he does not like it when you miss an appointment. And then we had to spend a half an hour talking about this man. I don't know. I don't know where he works.
But does he do hair real
And
well?
then there was like a little bit of like a wink, like, is he just a hairdresser? I don't know. And I'm like,
Yikes.
I'm a mandated reporter. Do I have to tell somebody about Daryl? I don't know.
I assume that you do deal with a number of kids who are not really super interested in being at school. Do you feel responsible to try to motivate them to be more interested in learning, or is that something that's kind of not really it's in your hands?
Yeah,
You're normie. I'll let you go
Would it-
first.
oh yes. Okay, so like being a boring teacher is easy. You print out the worksheets, you look up you can look up, oh, this standard, here's an activity for this standard, print it out on paper, give it to them, here you go, learn from this packet. Anyone can be a boring teacher. But the goal is to get them as engaged as possible so they can acquire the literacy of that subject. So science, particularly for science, I say, is important to so many aspects of our lives, especially now with disinformation everywhere. So getting them interested so that they can learn, because studies show in education, and I'm sure you were told this in education school, the more interested a kid is, the better they'll do. So the goal is truly to be the most interesting and entertaining way for them to learn.
Well, I was also going to say, not only is it important science, but in middle school, science is magic.
Oh, I know. That's why I became a middle school science teacher.
Not to brag, shout out to my middle school science teacher. He still works in the district that I work at because I work where I graduated from. But we did those like pine wood races with cars. He took us to Canopy Lake Park. Oh boy, it's a surprise I'm not a science teacher right now. You can really light a fire in them.
Trebuchets. We fling rubber bands across the room. I will fling. The rule when I was flinging rubber bands, if I fling a rubber band at you, I'm gonna do it. It's not gonna hurt you, but you get to fling a rubber band back at me. And then we observe how kinetic and potential energy work that way.
For me, it's not only do I feel compelled that I need to do it, or else it'll be so soul crushing to me that I would have had to leave my job, especially in alt ed, because not only are they disinterested a lot of the time, but they're not confident, or they're school damaged, meaning like they have had bad experiences in school, which make them continue to have bad experiences in school because they display behaviors that are not school appropriate. But like when I first started alt ed, it was really hard because, like I said, they have a hard time with the whole time thing. And so I would have huge absentee issues for like a myriad of reasons. And it's just so soul crushing to see like kids not coming and not failing and sometimes sitting in a room.
We should keep a tally of how many times we say soul crushing on this episode. Want to become a teacher? 2 words.
Well, luckily I am not soul crushed anymore. It was to sit in a room where kids were supposed to be and then they just wouldn't show up, and I had like no recourse because they would be like, oh, they don't care about these kids, so like don't even bother calling home because the phone numbers don't work, or like so that was really upsetting. But we actually created a whole new program while I taught there, and I helped create it, where we have them all day. So time shouldn't really be an issue, and it's really about building connections. So it's not just like, are they interested in what they're learning, but like, do they trust you? Like, do they have a good time in class? Because like that's what's going to draw them there. Sometimes, yes, the food is going to draw them there because they're food insecure and they don't have food, but once you got them hooked with that, you can let them know that it's a safe space, or you can let them know that, science is actually interesting and you can do things with it.
Well, and honestly, a lot of the time my goal isn't necessarily to get them to love science, but to get them to know that someone cares about them too, because that will keep a kid in school. If you build a connection, even if they're like, I hate science, as long as they respect you and have a back and forth with you, they'll start to appreciate it, and it will be like a positive pressure in their lives to be like, well, I could stop and do all this bull crap, but Miss Tepler would be disappointed in me.
Yeah, that someone cares about them, or that they actually are capable of doing it. Because I have had kids who insist that they hate poetry or they can't do this, they can't do that. And when actually like we'll sit down and we'll read a poem, and then they'll be so angry. I had a kid so angry at Langston Hughes once, and I'm like, what has happened? So like clearly they understand it and they get it, but they feel like there's a certain way they have to talk about it, or because of that school damage they've been told that they're dumb, and that there's certain answers that you need to
or that
talk
science
about.
doesn't apply to their lives.
Or that like, why would I write that? Why would I read that? I'm never gonna have to use that. And I'm like, well, you're literally passionately telling me something right now. What if you had actual facts to back you up?
I know.
That could be persuasive and make me tell you don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah. Or, I'll get like, what is it? I don't need to know all this science stuff. It's like, well, if you want to do welding, if you want to do any sort of trade, there's going to be science. If you want to have like empirical thought is just like needed to be a human. You need to be able to think scientifically, whether you know it or not. If you're a mechanic or if you're a genetics researcher, you need to know the scientific method.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which we could also go on about what standards we teach kids all day.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of go ask
Ooh.
about that, like, because there's got to be such a balancing act between trying to make things interesting and then also sticking to a curriculum.
Yeah.
And I was mostly homeschooled growing up.
Oh, I
so,
didn't know
What?
that.
Yeah.
You're a homeschool kid?
That's
Yeah,
probably why you're so
I am.
nice.
Maybe.
Yeah,
And so
that-
pure.
I was also Mormon, so
Wait. Oh, wait. I might have known this.
I think you might have known
You look
that.
like every ex-Mormon dude I've ever met.
Really?
Yeah, I've like a couple of them. They all look the same. They all
Nice.
look like you.
Yep.
Good old
That's-
Rim Duffy.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say I didn't know this. I know that we have.
Maybe I'm just thinking that I did know it because my roommate in a past life looks exactly like Tim Duffy and is a former Mormon as well. Well, are you
That's
still
tight.
Mormon?
No.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I've like seen you drink, so.
Yeah. No. That's in the past, but I never had to deal with any testing or anything
Mhm.
like that. And is that from what I hear, at least what I heard, like that is kind of a big thing in school is the standardized testing.
Everything stops for the NUIA.
I certainly see the need for that, but there's got to
don't.
also be you don't. And you would know better.
I think we should be monitoring student growth in some sort of in a way that is documented and standardized. However, the fact that we take standardized testing to determine how much money each school gets is monumentally stupid.
Yeah.
We should be giving money based on need, not on test scores and the amount of students who take these tests and their performance. And the fact of the matter is that all of these tests are incredibly biased. And so some of the questions will totally not make any sense to a student, for example, who wasn't born in the United States
Mhm.
and doesn't know idioms yet, but
Which I think ties into the Common Core
yes.
too.
Ugh,
really
yeah. Well,
well.
I don't deal with the Common Core.
Yeah.
But there's other things. Standards are totally different, and I understand. I love standards. Oh wow, kill me now. But standardized testing, I think, is just absolutely silly, and it's just we've made it useful by constructing a whole infrastructure around it.
Yeah.
I mean, I have vague angry rants, and they're different sections that I could go into.
I know.
I mean, I'll go into a little sidebar about the IQ test, which is just extremely racist, and that's what all standardized tests are really based off of.
Mhm.
So you can't have anything that is not, I'll say, problematic, because it's both racist and sexist and awful. So I'm using problematic to encompass all of that
Mhm.
when it's based off an IQ test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My issue, like I said with my kids, are that they're school damaged, and a lot of them like do not even like going into the main building. We've had to for a couple reasons, for safety reasons, but also for the SATs, which are mandatory. And guidance in our school has been really great and really tried to put them in small testing rooms, but even then the anxiety is up, and there's a certain way you have to do things with standardized testing, or else the whole room is invalidated.
Compromised.
So sorry, you're not allowed to have a panic attack right now. Is pretty much what happened to me a couple of years ago. And I just I picked up the student's desk, and I just took it into another room, and I talked to them quietly for a couple of minutes, and I just took their testing packet, and I brought it in the other room so it wouldn't disturb any of the other students. And I was like, we'll just do it here. I was supposed to be, you're supposed to have two people to co-proctor and run, and I was like, I am this person's proctor now. It's just a student shouldn't have to go through that mental anguish to get nothing. That student, while they did get accepted into college at that time, had no hopes to even apply to college. So why are we
Well, but we
putting
could also
them through
just get
that?
into the emphasis that's been put on college over the past 20
yeah.
years
Yeah.
that is also monumentally stupid. Yeah. And standardized testing also, particularly the SAT, just assumes that college is the destination for all these students when that is absolute garbage. And that's my probably biggest gripe with the past 30 years of education is how much we've pushed the importance of college education. When in the world we're seeing right now, that's not important. We have a shortage of people in the trades. College graduates aren't making enough money and are drowning in debt. Like it will create more generational poverty for a lot of these kids sending them to college.
Or like the idea like college is the only place where you can access like a liberal or humanitarian education. Like that should be incorporated in our ideals throughout so that we create well-rounded people, even if they are plumbers or welders or whatever, so that they can live a happy life and communicate with others. Like you shouldn't have to go to secondary education to make that happen.
I feel like kids should be able to make more choices in school than it seems like they are allowed.
Or
make.
exploration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exploration.
Not to get all Miss Frizzle, but like the chance to make mistakes and get
Absolutely.
messy without crushing
I
failure
wish I felt like I
happening.
could have made more mistakes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I
And,
couldn't
like,
in high school. I had to get into college.
Exactly. Well, and I had so much pressure to go to the best college I could possibly go to.
Yeah. How much control do you feel like you have over the classroom, kind of between the between what's expected of you with the standardized testing or the curriculum, and then what you think is important and what? Because I mean, I assume
Control of okay. I thought you were talking about like control over the kids because that is like a wild
Those are
card.
two different questions.
Yeah, but control over
what
we
kind of what you
teach.
teach. Yeah, what you teach in the classroom.
So I, as a science teacher, the state and nationally, we just prioritize math and literacy. Science and social studies sort of go by the wayside, and I have a little more flexibility because of that, which is very nice, and I can do things in my style. I also work in a district where for the past, I don't know, 150 years, ever since we shut down, this will give away the district.
The mill?
Ever since we shut down all the mills in the town.
That will not give away what district you work at because we're in Maine and there are several dying mill towns.
There's just been generational poverty in this district for the past 150 years, and nothing has worked so far. So that's one of the nice things about working in sort of what would be called a difficult district, is that you get the freedom to be like, you know what, nothing else is working. I'm going to try this. That being said, I'm supposed to get through 7 science standards a year.
Standard tests?
No, they are basically, so there's these things called the next generation science standards. And if you went to go get a master's in education, Tim, you would know all about it, but I guess I'll explain it. And it's basically just like these scientists and teachers got together and developed like what all these kids should know at these different stages. And our standards are based on the next gen science standards, and it's not all of them because no one can cover all of them. So someone just decided what the most important things are. And then actually like the 8th grade standards, there's like 10 of them. I pick probably the 7 that I think are most important that I want to teach. And then I go from there. And so I do have a little bit of wiggle room. I'm also like allowed to sort of put whatever spin I want on all that stuff. I will say, though it is very difficult because they don't get any science until they meet me. So that all makes things sort of difficult. But yes, I do sort of get to choose the lens through which we look at certain things like weather. So we're looking at weather through the focus of climate change, thinking about that.
Yeah.
And, but I wish it would be, I think it would be so much more helpful. Do you want me to, this wasn't the question, but I'm going to pontificate on what I think should happen. Especially in science, we focus on science practices, like understanding measurements, using a microscope, knowing field work methodologies that people actually use in science jobs, and just like drilling that scientific method through the lenses of different subjects. I think we should be graded on practices rather than content, because when you get to the higher levels of science or in the trades, what matters is the practices and not if you know the content. Because if you know the practices, you can learn the content on your own. And if you really understand the science, like that's what science is about, is trying to learn things for your own self and learning for yourself how to interpret things. And science is constantly changing. So when we teach them content, it's like when I teach them biology, when I teach them the basics of genes and genetics, the stuff I'm teaching them is already out of date.
Yeah.
So that's sort of my take on, I guess you'd asked about control. I feel like I do have a fair amount of control, more control than other teachers, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
but not nearly enough, I think, to get an adequate science education.
I have a lot of control over what I teach, though it's changed a lot. So, Micaela mentioned standards, and we used to be proficiency based. Like, oh, was it just last year?
You
I don't
tried.
what is time anymore. And so our program would go with the same standards that the mainstream did, but we made our own curriculum. So they would meet those standards, but I didn't necessarily have to read Catcher in the Rye with my kids. We could read something else or do something else and have them meet those standards. That is awesome and great because I can change the curriculum based on student interests. If a kid really is like, okay, I want to get a job right now. Can we do cover letters? And I'll be like, yep, we're doing cover letters next month. But what stinks about that is, like I said, I have 9 through 12, and I'm really fortunate that a lot of our kids want to reapply and be in our program again. But that means I cannot do what most of the mainstream classes do and teach the same thing again. So we have to make brand new curriculum for like the entire year, either throughout the year or like during the summer, which is really like, it's stressful while it's happening, but it's also super rewarding because we have a ton of stuff that we can work off of and we can work together as teachers. But I don't think a lot of even my other colleagues like in the mainstream building understand the amount of work that goes into that, or like understand that I'm not able to just use the blueprint, is what we call them, of what the other person did in sophomore English.
Yeah, that's sort of interesting. We both work sort of in a different category from the mainstream because especially at the elementary and middle school level, math and literacy are these specific programs that are planned out day to day. Friggin' Lucy Calkins. If I ever meet that bitch, she's gonna get Lucy. That's something like only teachers forget because the kids don't even know the names of the programs. I interviewed
at a middle school, and like I got somebody sat me down and was like, okay, you need to look up these things right now. Like, you need to look up Lucy Calkins and her writing method. You need to know how to do it.
Who is
I don't
who / what is Lucy Calkins?
A woman who was a teacher, probably with a doctorate, who said these are the ways that children learn how to write.
So it's like best practices for writing that a lot of middle school and elementary schools.
But is it best practices? Who knows?
Well, it probably hasn't been reevaluated in a really long time. So like people use it and it's good. It's like, and I don't want to get down on anybody who uses it because I'm sure that it is effective. I haven't used it, but in the way that it's convenient sometimes to make a photocopy of a packet and have a kid do it, I'm sure it's very comforting to think, oh, well, somebody else has done the work for me, and this is what we're doing today. And it's also probably good for students in some ways, in that like a lot of my students find comfort, whether they know it or not, in structure, like in like, okay, this is happening, I know what I'm supposed to do, because I feel like, especially with the trauma, they like when something is unexpected, it feels like a full-blown like panic. But like if you're like already hate writing and then you're like, okay, I know I make a list first and then I write this, that can be really helpful to teach people how to write. But I'm sure when they're adults and they might actually want to write something else, it could probably be harmful.
Yeah, it's also like, and the thing about public school education is that it teaches you how to write in one specific way.
A very certain way.
A very certain way that doesn't always necessarily even translate to what you're going to do in college. You know, and it depends on where you go. Also, just like we're talking about these systems and how people use them, but the accountability in public education in all facets, in the programs that we use, making sure that teachers stay on track is just like so low. So low.
You mean it feels like no one's making sure teachers stay on track, or
I think
they're focused on that too much?
what is happening, what I think is happening, is like the stress level of accountability is here.
Yes.
So, and also like they change the way that you're going to be evaluated. It feels like nearly constantly. So, like,
Yes.
okay, you were going to be evaluated on these 4 domains and you're supposed to know it. But also, like, let's say what happened to me, I wasn't given a mentor teacher until the last month of the year. They just like forgot I
Oh, my
existed.
mentor teacher, who I've had for a year and a half, has met with me once.
Yeah, so like the mentor teacher
And
program
this is like a
isn't
state mandated thing.
Yeah.
it isn't great, and
Oh,
they
terrible.
forget, and so then you're like handed this thing you have to fill out immediately. And for me, they didn't tell me how I had to fill it out. So it went to the certification committee, and then it got sent back because I didn't use the right verbiage. I
Oh
didn't
my
use
God.
I will or with the help of my
the
mentor
same
teacher.
exact thing happened to me.
And it's like 3 pages that you had to write, and you had to find time to do it
Yeah.
somehow.
And they make you make goals that you're literally like never evaluated on at the end of the year.
So like that's how you're being evaluated, and you feel like you're going into it blindly, and then you're like, okay, well, my career rides on this, and I've never seen it before, and I was told to do it in 30 seconds.
And then your
But
career
then, like-
absolutely does not ride on it.
But then like what you're actually teaching and what matters, nobody is looking at. Like
Oh, wow.
I had one not so great experience where a principal came. He sat down while I was supposed to be doing duty at like the finals, like in the hallway, making sure kids weren't making noise while other kids were taking finals. And he sat down, and he had never observed me in my classroom, and he had copy and pasted things from other observations. And he was like, "Does this sound good?" And
oh
I,
my God.
for like once in my tiny petrified life, was like, no, it does not sound good.
I will say, so we have an evaluation system where there's an administrator who's assigned to you who does several evaluations a year, no matter where you are in your career, which I really like, particularly because I really, really like my admin and they give me really good feedback. But it's never anything that rides on my career. They're never actually like, send me your lesson plans that you're told to do in education
Do
school.
you write lesson plans?
Absolutely not.
Oh, okay, I was like,
Oh
why are you
my
looking to
God.
send something that doesn't exist?
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. But the amount of lessons plans you need to write in education school. And I will say now, with the COVID, I make a weekly calendar with an I can statement and what we're going to do in class at the beginning of the week. I was told we had to do that by the state. You're not doing that? I'm going to tell Janet Mills.
I do
Heather Macon. Ring,
I do
ring.
essential questions that none of my students or coworkers care about.
Oh yeah, that too. But that is like the most planning. I also just generally think on my toes, and that's where probably my best practices come from, because it ends up being hyper responsive to what students need. So I'll make slides with open-ended questions on them, and like I guess I could make it so that takes up 20 minutes of class, but I ended up it ends up taking an hour because we explore the kids' interests and things like that.
I have really enjoyed like hybrid model in a lot of ways, in that it's a smaller class. We actually have read a
Yes.
book
Oh
this
my
year
God.
for the first time, like
The
ever
small
in
class
Alton.
size is
It's so
nice.
great. Like especially with my group A kids who are on Monday and Tuesday and actually like know that they're supposed to be in school. They're like really thriving in a lot of ways, because we have time, and by time I mean like I have individual focus on these kids, and it's quieter. But what's kind of not great about it is it's such a reduced time now, because I have to have mass breaks because we have them all day. So they have like 15-minute mass breaks like almost every hour, and they are not great at transitions, as you probably know if you've ever met a teenager.
Yeah.
So they do not get right back
Yeah.
on the 15 ready to go. So like I plan out what I want to do, and it for a day, and it ends up taking a week because
Yep.
we like do not have time. Like I
That
want to
will
hook
happen.
them. Like you want to play like, I don't know, an interesting 2-minute video, and then like ask for their response, or like we'll read a quick poem, and that will take up the majority of the time. And we don't like, I don't want to give them a writing assignment that's supposed to be 30 minutes when we only have 15 minutes. Like
Mhm.
so
Also, if you and because we in a way work with similar populations, if you have any sort of crisis, which happens quite often in our line of work, that can completely derail everything, and you
Yeah.
have to be able to rearrange your total schedule.
One time in the first year of our program, during a break, a kid, there's not like a forest, but there's like a group of trees
Mhm.
behind our building. A kid went in there and he kicked a hornet's nest, and then
Oh,
he came running back
The
into the
boy who
classroom
kicked the hornet's nest.
and just brought all the bees with him. And like
oh
he
no.
was actually great about it. He was like covered in bees under his clothes, like and he just stood very still. But the nurse came, like we called her and she came running over and she like had to shove kids out because they're chaos brain. They're like running
Oh my
around.
god.
And
Oh, and
obviously the
kids
whole
plus
day is like over.
bees. They're
Yeah,
just like,
right.
they think they're going. Also, I mean, that is actually a situation where their bees are a real issue, but like to start kids from plus bees
Just like
or
a bee,
insects,
it's like
it's
ruined your whole
absolutely
day.
insane.
A bee outside your classroom that they can see from the window, they're all gonna run
Oh
at
my
it.
god, we have Bates
Just
cross
one
country
bee.
team boys that run by, and the girls are gone for 20 minutes. Oops, gave away my district.
Since you're dealing with kids every day and they are quite literally the future, do you feel hopeful for their generation, or are you nervous?
I do see progress in a lot of ways. Even in sort of like the place I work where there is a lot of tension between different groups of people, queerness is a non-issue. It's
Yeah.
like an absolute non-issue.
Yeah.
I will say kids will say like that's gay, but then I'll interrupt that and I'll tell them and they'll think about it and they'll be like, well, I mean, being gay is fine. I'm friends with blah 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 blah. It's still stupid to say it, but there's less insidious
It's
hate
not as
against
it's
queer
not as
people.
as hate filled
Yeah,
as it used to
it's
be.
really just not. The kid, I would say, like the queer kids for the most part get left alone.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it's not just the sort of thing where I'm totally missing it. But as someone, I think, I have pretty strong relationships with a lot of queer kids, and I feel like I would know
Mhm.
a little bit more about it. I am hopeful, and I do see, especially in Maine and the district I work at, that's like super diverse and has a large population of immigrants and Black people in a way that the rest of Maine really doesn't, besides maybe Portland. I see kids who just are growing up knowing how to interact with people who are other than them in a much better way than I saw when I was growing up. I also see kids who are super, super engaged in social issues in a way that I've never seen before. So I do feel a lot of hope. I worry about literacy quite a bit. It feels like so many kids just like can't read, which is really scary. But also, I
Even
wonder.
though there's so much, even though that's one of the main
Yeah.
focuses.
And perhaps this is even like, oh yeah, well, it's a main focus because it has to be a main focus.
Yeah.
But like, maybe perhaps this is another podcast, but I almost wonder if we're evolving beyond literacy.
But you mentioned being literate in your own subject area
Literate,
earlier.
I don't
like-
mean reading. So when I say literacy,
I
of
know, but that
science,
is the same thing in like communication. You can be literate in different forms of
perhaps
communication that
perhaps I
aren't necessarily.
mean moving beyond not literacy, but moving beyond reading. Which sounds way dumb.
visual
I'm gonna
learning.
eat my words and go back to being a bartender.
I'm gonna answer the prompted question and not the provocative question that's happening in Micaela's eyes. But I keep saying this, but I'm also in an interesting position because I'm working at the school that I graduated from, so I
Mhm.
can see progress in a long term way that I feel like maybe even teachers who work there and have worked there for a long time can't necessarily see because they didn't go through that school system. But it's a double-edged sword because I can see the things that were still awful because like I wasn't very affluent when I went there. I wasn't like super poor, but I wasn't affluent and I was an only child and my parents had never been to college, which like I was in honors and AP classes. So my teachers never even thought about what I wasn't literate in, like how
Yeah.
I didn't know how to apply to college. I didn't know these things, and there was nobody helping me do that. But now we have what we call an aspirations coordinator, and even that is a huge step because
Mhm.
she can be there and know that there are who the first generation college
Mhm.
students are and what they need. Whereas, like when I went there, I asked for scholarships, and the secretary and guidance just pointed to a box and told
Oh
me to
my
look into
God.
it. And like I was
Yeah.
like, cool, I guess I will die working in the seafood section of Hannaford, and I hate my life.
You still might die working in the seafood
No,
section of
I'm never
Hannaford.
going back. I don't care what happens.
What about the seafood section of Shaw's?
No.
Market basket.
You know what? I'm not a
What
fish.
about something
I
nice?
quit
Whole
being a
Foods.
fishmonger.
Okay.
So that's good. I'm also the civil rights team supervisor at my school. So I get to hear a lot of, I would say, the things that students wish would change. So I get to see how those things are changing. Like I get to
Mm.
see how teachers are really willing to put in the effort to do that. But I also get to see how some teachers are resistant to that for their own personal reasons, or resistant to that because they're
Teachers can be so resistant.
they can, but some of it, like, even though I don't think it's the appropriate reaction to it,
Mm-hmm.
is because they're being asked to do
So
so
many things.
much,
Yeah,
and they're
that's
like,
part of it
guess
too.
what? I'm not an
Gonna.
activist. So no, I'm not
Yeah.
taking time out of pre-calc to talk about this. So I get to get frustrated and disheartened with how things haven't changed since I've been in high school there. But I also get to see like my program, the dropout program, that used to just be like a credit recovery room where if you wanted to graduate, if you wanted to be the first person in your family to graduate, you could go sit in that room and make up all the classes that you failed, has become like this community that has used to have field trips every week. Like that is my
Mhm.
favorite part, is like being able to give a kid an experience that they never had before and never could even think that they could have had before, like going on a train or something. They were like, whoa, I didn't know this was an option, or like seeing different jobs, like, and that way it really opens up a lot of opportunities that like they never even knew existed, and that creates like a lot of hope, I think.
I just want to mention Leah's the civil rights team advisor. I am the anime club advisor. She makes a difference, and here's what the kids want to change. I see 12-year-olds get horny to cartoons.
The weebs need people too. Is weebs a
It
thing?
is
Is that
actually,
like
no, it
is
is
that
like,
a word?
well, I could get into the importance of anime clubs, but it is like a catch-all for kids who feel like they
Community.
don't belong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People need community.
Yeah.
And I remember like trying this is a very embarrassing story in that it's also very boring. But like a lot of my friends who were older than me in high school, they were into anime. And I remember like wanting to go to PortCon. And then I got nervous because like I didn't have a group to go with. And I walked in the door and saw all the people. And I had made my dad drive me there. And I just turned around and I
was
walked
like,
back to the
"Never
car.
mind."
But like community is so important. Like a sense of belonging
Yeah,
can
and-
For
keep
sure.
kids
well, and that's
in
how
school.
I've made
Yeah.
so many connections to queer students, because a lot of kids like feel as though they can more express their sexuality with anime in a way,
Or explore it, like
or
explore
Yeah,
different
that's what I
stories.
mean. Yeah, express or explore, and just like alternative from what they're fed normally.
Or explore different cultures too.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Community. It's important. But kind of to wrap it up, after hearing how soul crushingly underfunded and kind of underserving public schools are, what do you think is kind of one or two things that you think they are doing well, if any?
We're giving time to think. The silence is not concerning.
Yeah, Yeah, no, I truly want to think about what, because I do think there are things that public schools do well. To me, I regularly say this to my colleagues who don't believe this, but America's public schools are our foremost socialist institution. And there are things that are good that come out of this. I think in part because so much is not met elsewhere. So I think
Yeah.
nutrition programs at schools are incredible. Kids who normally would not get a meal that day get two. But that's partially Title I, which is this whole program that takes like the lowest, I forget what percentage of schools it is, but it's a certain poverty line and everyone gets provided. It's instead of like you have to get in the free and reduced lunch line, it's like everyone blanket gets meals. I also think connections to social services, connections to social services in general is a good thing that public schools do. And I think there's just like the ability, like with a good teacher can make a huge difference in a kid's life. So those 3 things, but so we do good things.
Yeah, I mean, there's the classics. Was going to say the same thing. Like a lot of my students are food insecure. Like all of them have the capability of being on free and reduced lunch. Whether
Mhm.
they take that opportunity or not is up to them and their families. But like throughout the pandemic, even when we were just like pretty much straight up closed for 2 weeks because the school was like, I don't know what to do. Like
Yeah.
when March 13th hit, and they were still giving out food every day. But I think just creating, like, you never have the opportunities that you have when you are in high school or college because you have the structure, you have social workers that you can see, you have guidance to help you, even if they do just point to a box and tell you to look through it, which they don't anymore, which
You
is
have
great.
teachers that care about you
Yeah.
and think about you
And
constantly.
you have clubs. So maybe you don't love anime, but you go there because your friend drags you there and you want to be around those people. You get to experience new things. And I think that's a big thing that public education does is that if you are at home and your parents have like one thing that they enjoy, but they don't know about all these other opportunities, the school has like different clubs and different people that you can create a community with, and you can learn Chinese in Chinese club. You can learn history in the Civil Rights Club, or go and learn about different protests. Or some of our students, the Juneteenth rally. Not that we had anything to do with it, but she was a recent graduate who sort of organized that, and obviously that gave me a ton of hope, even though that's not directly related to the school.
Mm-hmm.
That she had the organizational skills and the passion to do that school hadn't beaten the passion out of her.
Yeah.
Whether it had tried to or not, I don't know, but like that is really hopeful. So you can find people in groups
Yeah.
there, and it's a place that cultivates those
And
ideas.
in the public school system, I really do think, and maybe this comes from a place of privilege, but I do think if you have the passion and you make it known as a student, there is a teacher or a guidance counselor or an administrator or a social worker who will help you get connected to that.
Yeah.
I'd be hard pressed if a kid told me they were hugely interested in something and they wanted to pursue it. We'd be able to find a way.
That's great. That's great. Well, if either of you like ever need someone to come in to class and
Talk
just
about
talk about
beer.
Don't joke, because I dragged
Yeah.
Brendan Williams into my class the other day.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my co-teacher was doing a unit on ASL and talking about hearing impaired and deaf culture, and I was like, I got a friend.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we'll bring you in. Don't
yeah,
threaten me
I'll
with a
just
good
come
time.
in and tell them. I would kind of like that Chris Farley, like you
I
could,
live in a
you could,
van
yeah,
down by
I
the
could come in and do
river.
that and just tell them how much of a gift learning is.
A gift.
Yeah, because I think like now I think about how much I would like to be in school, which is the weird thing about school. I feel like
Yeah.
we teach kids at the age they're the
Don't
least
it always
receptive
seem
to it.
like, oh, that you
So-
don't know what you got
So
till
let's
it's
go.
gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I guess you could just play that song and then you wouldn't have to bring me in. You could just play
Just
them
let
that song
Joni
and be like,
Mitchell
Tim
speak.
Duffy said to play this
Well,
song.
you know.
Show him a picture of me
Do you
and
use
have
the
him
scientific
roast
method in your everyday life?
me. Yeah.
Well,
I
then
mean,
let's talk about it. Bring you in.
actually, I don't know. In homeschooling,
about it,
science wasn't a priority in
Do some.
homeschooling.
Yeah,
so
I bet the Mormon faith does
Yeah.
not prioritize genetics and
no, that wasn't prioritized.
perhaps physics to launch your spaceship. Right? Am I hating on Mormons
That's
too much?
different.
Yeah,
that's
that's not-
different.
I thought there's a space aspect. Anyways,
Not
Consult the
Mormons.
plates and tell us what's
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
Plates, that is Mormon. That's Mormon.
Plates?
Yeah, golden plates
He found the plates.
in
It's like-
upstate New York. Thank you.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
guys. I'm
Thank
still
you.
learning about how to do this.
Slim
so-
Timothy.
I actually had a student who would get really upset that I wouldn't say you're welcome because I would say like no problem or like
I always say
and-
no problem.
yeah
Yeah, me too.
and
Like,
Yeah.
he was
Of
like,
course.
that's not polite. Sorry.
You're
De
welcome.
nada.